So the other day, I made a video talking about triple support, and I gave my thoughts and opinions on it. But I felt like for the rank that I'm at, it would probably be better to bring in two people from the server who were a little bit higher skilled and higher ranked than myself to be able to give their opinions about it. And they both had opposing views about it, and both of their views were, very articulate and very well put. And they both gave really good examples for either why it is a big deal or why it's not a big deal. But it actually got me thinking after the fact if maybe that's why we're not getting as many supports in the game after the fact. So let's talk about it. YouTube, what's going on, man? It's Father Dark. Hope everybody's having a great week so far and all that good jazz. But let's go ahead and get into the video. So, like I said, from the triple support conversation that we've been having, the whole community's kind of been having. People are very kind of like they either feel like it's a really big deal or they feel like people are just not willing to adapt and it's not that big of a deal. But me personally, it's kind of got me thinking about some other stuff. And one of the biggest complaints that I'm hearing, especially like in the server, I try as much as I can to kind of like talk to people, pick their brains and stuff, and kind of see how they feel about the game, because no two people feel exactly the same way, right? Even if you feel like you kind of agree on a lot of things, I'm sure there's topics you could bring up where you might disagree. And obviously, there's a lack of supports in the game. Now, what I find interesting about this is that in this game, the roles aren't always as clear cut and defined. So you have supports that are just pretty much straightforward supports, and then you have like off supports, off healers. And good examples of those would be like Adam Warlock, Ultron, Mantis. Those are probably some of the most popular in that regard. And me personally, I like that those options are in the game. The only time I don't, honestly, is when you're playing against people and they kind of don't understand that there's a difference between like an off support versus you picking that support. Like, for example, picking let's say there's a Cloak and Dagger and then someone just picks Ultron instead of picking like Cloak and Dagger and a Luna Snow. And a lot of people like to go back and forth over that and say, well, I should be able to do this. I've won games that way. And the problem is kind of like how I pulled in two people from the server that were in higher ranks, because in every rank you have different situations. So the things that you can get away with in bronze, you're not going to be able to get away with in silver, et cetera, et cetera. The things you might be able to do in gold, once you get up to diamond or GM or something like that, people are going to be playing a little bit better. They're going to be more efficient at their characters. The team structures are going to be a little bit more refined, versus where like in lower ranks is kind of just like a free-for-all, which can be its own problem a lot of times, especially when you don't have like band picks and stuff like that, and then you have seasonal resets. So there's all these different exceptions to stuff, right? But one thing that might work one time against a certain comp or with certain players is not always going to work. So another example, in our server, we have someone that's a very good Mantis, like an extremely good Mantis, and they're a flanking Mantis. And I've always kind of went by an expression that my brother uses a lot when it comes to games like this, and that's that dead people don't do damage. So you can have some of the best healers in the world, but let's say that they're only really good at healing. They're not very aggressive. If they're healing people that are just getting deleted or don't really know what they're doing, that doesn't really matter. And you can have someone else that's an extremely aggressive healer. Like, let's say you have a Mantis that's just kind of healing every once in a blue moon, but they're deleting everyone because they're flanking them. You don't have to heal people that aren't dying, right? And the people that are dying, they're not outputting any damage because they're dead or they've been deleted. So there's no need to have to heal those individuals. And a lot of people, they sit back and they say, well, a simple solution to fix all of this would be role queue. And in this game, I've noticed anytime that I've brought up role queue, even though I've never really personally been in favor of it, is that people just get very upset by the idea of role queue. It's usually a bunch of people in the comments that don't even watch the video. They just see the thumbnail or the title. And if it has anything to do with role queue, first thing out of their mouth is, take that back to Overwatch. And what's funny is that I didn't really play Overwatch much. And by the time that I did get into Overwatch, and it wasn't even me getting into it, it was just me playing with friends and family that really wanted me to. One of the things that I noticed was that there was role queue. That was just something that to me, I thought was always there. Come to find out later on, role queue was something that was implemented years later after the game had already come out, right? And the thing that's interesting about this game is that you do have these off characters. I don't really know if there's any for DPS. You guys can let me know in the comments if there are. Just off the top of my head, I don't really know if there's any good examples of that. But you do have characters like, there are examples like Mr. Fantastic, for example, is a DPS character, but people refer to him as like an off tank because he is very tanky and he doesn't really do a lot of damage. That's kind of like the trade-off to him being so tanky. But then you do have like off tanks, kind of like an Angela or something like that. You have off supports, like I said before, Ultron, Mantis, Adam Warlock, and stuff like that. So when you're thinking about balancing things for role queue, you would have to kind of like restructure a lot of these characters because they don't just kind of fit in one class. It's like we have to put them in a class because of like maybe they have some type of primary function, but it's just not the same. Like Adam Warlock's healing is not really comparable, in my opinion, to a Luna Snow or Adam Warlock or a Rocket or something like that, right? Those are far more like straightforward support players. And then you have this problem in the community where there's a lot of people that feel like support should be more interesting, and that kind of takes priority to them over I guess I can't say it takes priority over them winning, because in their heads they still feel like they could win that way, but we all know how it feels if you got like a Jeff and a Ultron or something on your team versus two consistent healers like a Cloak and Dagger or a Rocket, a Luna Snow, something like that. And we know how that feels, especially when the enemy team does have what's considered these more like consistent support players. You're going to go, oh, okay, well, this seems to be working a lot more for them, et cetera, et cetera. And in this game, the supports, I feel like, have a lot of agency in regards to being able to be aggressive and being able to heal. And to me, that kind of goes for like any support player. As I've went on in this game, I went from being someone that would be considered more like a heal bot, where I stayed in the back, I played my position, I didn't try to make any plays. I tried to ult only when I felt like it was needed and people told me to. And I didn't play very aggressively. And as time has went on and I've had to carry matches where my teammates just were not doing what they were supposed to do. You know, you get that Iron Fist that goes 3 and 12, the Spider-Man that just will not swap even though he's getting diffed completely just all throughout the match. And it's like, well, my DPS aren't doing anything, so I'm going to have to heal and I'm going to have to go up here and delete people. And this is one of the reasons why I feel like Cloak and Dagger has always been slept on, because you have so many tools and abilities in your kit. I'm able to put a bubble on people if they're fighting like in one spot. Let's say the tanks are kind of sitting in a corner or something like that, trying to push around the corner. You can put the bubble on them, and that does extremely good healing. It's giving me my ult charge a lot faster, but then I can also push up and blind the enemy. And I believe it's like, what, a 29%, 30% damage boost for a temporary period of time. And they're also blinded. And then by the time that all of that's over and done with, I can fade out and go back to the back line and go back to healing and stuff. Same thing when I pop my ult. I'll usually try to ult all the way to the back line where the supports are, blind them. So you're taking damage from my ult, you're also blinded. I delete you, and then I can just fade back out, be invincible for a few seconds, and go right back to the back line and just start healing. And those plays make massive difference in the game. When you have a support player that is ulting at the right time and they're ulting the right way and they're actually taking out the other support players, that's going to make a massive difference versus someone that's just sitting there heal botting. And I've seen this a ridiculous amount of times where the other team is like, well, we had 36K in healing. And it's like, yeah, but you had 3 eliminations though. Whereas I may have only had 25K healing, but I had triple the amount of eliminations that you had, or sometimes even more than that and stuff. And when everybody is deleting people, once again, dead people don't do damage. So to me, there's so many different factors that go into it. And like I said, a lot of people are getting to the point where they start to feel like the supports in the game are actually broken, to where they just have way too much agency to be able to delete people and be able to heal people. And obviously people are always going to be biased. So when you have people that play support, of course they're going to want the support players to be able to be more like what their name actually is, which is in this game is a strategist. So it's up to you to decide what exactly you want to do and how you want to handle situations. Obviously, though, if you're someone who's playing DPS, you're kind of like, bro, I'm having to, and I feel like a really good example, right, is take like Scarlet Witch and Cloak and Dagger, for example. I fear no 1v1 against like a Scarlet Witch. Now, I don't mind Scarlet Witch. I think she's actually a pretty good DPS now, especially with the buffs that she's gotten. But at the same time, though, let's say you get into a 1v1 with a Cloak and Dagger and a Scarlet Witch, right? If me and her go to 1v1, I can put a bubble down, I can blind her, and I'm more than likely going to win that 1v1. It's just that simple. And honestly, I do think that's kind of unfair that a support should be able to that easily delete a DPS character, that they have kind of like these similar kind of kits in regards to like the way that they, have the auto aim and just kind of holding down a button at that point. And the overall point that I'm making here is from a developer standpoint, trying to appease people with supports to where you have the side that feels like, oh, well, I like these characters that don't have these healing ults. Like that was something that people used to say a lot about, like Rocket and Jeff. And people would say, well, I like the fact that Jeff isn't just like this heal bot who just, he just pops this ult and everybody's invincible for 8 to 12 seconds or however long, most of these ults are and stuff like that. Same thing with Rocket. Originally, he was just a damage boost. And then people complain enough saying, hey, I'm getting these supports on my team regularly because these people just kind of feel like, oh, I want to be different from everybody else and I want to feel special while I'm healing. But ultimately, you're just kind of selling your team when the enemy team doesn't have any kind of qualms about any of that stuff, and they just pick supports that are going to give the healing ults and are going to kind of play in regards to what people consider to be heal bots, which I personally don't feel like that's a heal bot, just because you're doing what your role is, which is healing people. I only feel like a heal bot is someone who just only sits back and heals. Nonetheless, though, the point I'm making is, like I said, from a developer standpoint, it's kind of hard to create these characters because you create them and maybe your intentions are good initially. You say, hey, we'll have Cloak and Dagger, Luna Snow. They have these ults that pretty much make you damn near invincible other than being one-shotted for a duration of the game. And then we're going to create these other characters like Rocket, where, he does a lot of damage with his secondary, but his primary, just kind of heals maybe a little bit slower than everyone else. And then his ult is a damage booster. Then we have Jeff, where he can displace people, et cetera, right? But then ultimately, as time goes on, what's happened with these characters? Rocket, he started giving people overshield. I don't think that it heals you at all. And once again, you guys can correct me in the comments. A lot of times when it comes to the nitty gritty to a lot of these details, I don't actually know like all the specifics. There's things that I miss just like anyone else. But it's the same thing with Jeff. Jeff used to just have displacement. Now he actually gets a healing pool for people, which does pretty good healing. And then he also gets to still displace people, which in my opinion, I don't mind Jeff being on my team as much anymore, right? And they've completely reworked his kit, I feel like, to make him more accessible in different ways and stuff like that, and kind of tone down the Jeff hate that's been there from the very beginning, I feel like. So yeah, it does kind of get hard to make characters where you're going to appease people without making these characters where people are going to sit back and say, oh, well, it's just a heal bot. It's all they do. You just press a button and you heal people, or maybe you have this other thing that you can do like a bubble, or you put a shield up in front of them and it heals them, yada, yada, yada. Whereas with other characters, I don't feel like you really run into those problems with, like, especially DPS, because you can pretty much just do anything with them and no one's ever there's no term for like a DPS bot or a damage bot or something like that. I mean, yeah, you have characters kind of like that people say are like no skill characters, kind of like Wanda. Wanda gets a lot of hate for that, where people say, oh, she's a no skill character. And then they proceed to pick up Wanda and get absolutely diffed by another Wanda. And I think that's something that people do a lot of times. But regardless, though, it's just you don't hear those accusations as much with other roles as you do with supports. Not to mention, there's kind of, like I said, this rock and a hard place that you kind of get put in with supports, because supports, they have one of the hardest jobs in the game. You have to heal people, but you're also constantly having to deal with being targeted and prioritized. And a lot of people will say, well, people should peel for you. Keyword is should. Whenever should is involved, you're leaving that up to other people to want to do it, or to just be aware that it's happening to begin with and to do it. And that's just not how that's going to work a lot of times. Most people are very selfish. They have tunnel vision, whether it's, something they're doing purposely or they're unaware of it. It's just something that's going to happen. A lot of people just get really into what they're doing. There's times where it happens myself, where I'm playing a tank and I'm trying so hard to get to the point, and then I'm like, why am I not being healed? But this other team is. And I look back and maybe there's a Venom in their back line, or maybe Thor is flanking and doing some crazy nonsense, whatever. There's a DPS going crazy back there, and Angela, whatever, right? And obviously, not everyone is going to be to a point with support to where they feel super comfortable being really aggressive, or maybe they're fully aware of how to do it, or whatever the case is. I notice that a lot with supports. Like me, when I play a support, I'm usually looking at it like I'm the threat, right? I'm the one that knocks, for anybody that gets that reference, right? Like I'm the problem, just like I was explaining with Cloak and Dagger. The other day I was playing a match, and there was this Captain America and someone else. I can't remember who was flanking with them, but they just kept trying so hard to delete me. And I know their feelings had to be hurt, because the bubble from Cloak and Dagger does enough healing to where Cap can't even kill me. Like, he has to have someone else that is like directly focusing me at the exact same time, putting pressure on me. And even then, it's like I can just fade out, reposition. By the time I'm done with the fade out, it's usually a second or two before your bubbles come back. And with the blind, you put enough damage on them, especially if anyone else is shooting them at all, to where they're going to have to dip out and go get healed. And usually if you're playing someone like that is diving in the back line, you're going to have to get back to your team, which is going to take a bit of a time. And like I said, if anything, you're just kind of helping me out because not only am I healing myself, but I'm also putting that damage out on you, which is just giving me my ult faster and stuff like that. So like I said, you want to be able to give supports the ability to handle themselves in tough situations and stuff so that people want to play support and don't feel like it's just kind of this defeatist thing where I'm going to play support and I got to worry about every single character in the game trying to dive me and there's just absolutely nothing that I can do. I'm solely relying on my teammates to help me every single time, which like I said, that's just not realistic. Anyone that's played support has been in plenty of situations where you're fighting for your life and your team is, you look over and your team is just not paying you any attention. You're pinging that you need help. You're pinging the enemies. Maybe even you're speaking in chat and you're telling them and they're just kind of like, figure it out, bro, or they just ignore you, whatever the case is. So it kind of puts them like in a rock in a hard place. And I know a lot of people, they think that like they focus more on supports and stuff simply because supports are more popular. But in my opinion, like I've always said, I feel like, DPS. And like I said, in my opinion, I think a lot of people tend to pick DPS more because it's kind of like this in-between role. And I know a lot of people, they sit back and they say, well, it's the hardest role mechanically. That sounds really nice. But at the same time, though, if you really play support, you know how hard it is and how much you have to be aware of everything. You cannot get tunnel vision. And it's the same thing when you play a tank. Tank is a very hard role because you're on the front lines. And if you're playing tank correctly, there are so many different things you have to do. And you really have to be a playmaker and really understand the same way that you have to pay attention to what's going on behind you. Like I gave the example the other day when I was playing Thor and I'm trying to get to the point and I had to ask my team like, hey, listen, what's going on back there? Every time that I push up, I notice you guys are still around the corner and you're just coming up after the fact, whereas the enemy supports are getting zero pressure and they're just sitting there, pocketing the tanks and stuff like that. So it's impossible for me to win against these guys because it's just not a fair point, a fair fight at that point, right? And once they told me, they said, yeah, we have Venom back here. There was someone else that was back here. I think it was like Angela or something, or somebody else that was diving them. And once I peeled for them, they were able to get a little bit more confident and push up. We ended up winning. But that first round was really rough, though, right? So every role kind of has stuff that makes it tough. But I feel like when I played DPS, when I went on my week and a half, 2 week long DPS villain arc, which I'm about to do again when Daredevil releases. It didn't feel as bad to me as when I'm having to play tank or when I'm having to play support. And that's just my personal opinion, but I am curious to know what you all think. Like I said, being someone who I don't mind playing support and I've played support more than any other role in this game. I do wish that they would release more of them simply because it gets boring. Like you only have so many choices to pick from. And even though they've reworked a lot of them and they've changed a lot of different things, it does just kind of get boring. It's like, well, I'm either going to do this or I'm going to do that. Whereas you look at DPS and they have 2/3 of the roster to choose from. Even with tanks, they're slowly, getting more tanks and stuff like that. And I do feel as if there's a bit more diversity kind of overall in regards to tanks and stuff. So just let me know in the comments, though, what you guys think about it. I do think that it's a really interesting topic, and I am curious to know what you all's thoughts and opinions are on it. Just like always, a lot of you know a lot more than I do myself, so I always love to hear what you have to say about it. But that's pretty much all I have for this video. I just kind of want to talk about that for a little bit and vent. Yeah, so I'm going to let you all go, but I do appreciate you for watching. I'm Father Dark, and I'll catch you on the next one.